And we're live.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Ops Show, where we bring you the trials and tribulations, automations and collaborations from the world of workflows, DevOps, and the greater developer experience. I'm your host, Tristan Pollock, as always, with CTO.ai founder Kyle Campbell. In our best show yet, we have Nader Dabit, mobile and web developer, author of Full Stack Serverless, modern application development with React, AWS, and GraphQL, and DevRel at AWS Cloud and Amplify. Welcome to the show, Nader. So excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here and talk about all the things that we're going to be covering today.
So many things to dive into. Let's just kick it off. Give us a little bit of your code story, your journey up till now, and like how you got into code, as well as what you started, what you're kind of focusing your time on at the moment.
Okay, so I've been doing this, I would say now almost 10 years. So there is a long story. I'll try not to spend too much time on it though. But what I do now is, like you mentioned, I'm a senior developer advocate. I'm actually leading the advocacy team on the mobile team right now in AWS. So we have maybe a half dozen people or so that are kind of DevRel on our team. And we are focused on not only mobile at the moment, but we're also kind of breaching into a lot of modern web technology. So we also deal with a lot of things like building out web clients and web frameworks or web clients for frameworks like React and React Native, and even things now like Flutter and Next.js and things like that. We also have stuff like web hosting. So we're kind of doing the whole spectrum from modern web to mobile. And yeah, I've been here for about a little over 2.5 years. And before I joined AWS, I was a consultant, an independent consultant running the company called React Native Training, which I still actually own and run. I just don't do any personal training anymore. Now I have a few customers that still come in, and I just kind of route them to contractors and things like that. And I got into coding kind of just self-taught. I learned how to do PHP when I was playing around with WordPress. And it was something that I really enjoyed doing more than I'd done anything else before. So I decided to kind of stick with that, and decided like coding was for me. And I live in Mississippi, and I work remotely now, and I've lived here pretty much my whole life. So at the time, there wasn't really a lot of opportunities here in Mississippi. So what I did was just started looking for jobs anywhere in the United States, and I would kind of expand my reach further and further until I finally found someone that would hire me in LA. So I packed up and moved out to LA for that first opportunity, and moved my family out there. We stayed out there for a year or so, and worked with a couple of companies out there. Kind of got my feet wet and learned how it was to be working on a team of really high performing engineers, people that I probably would have never really been exposed to over here. So it really was a positive experience for me. And after kind of feeling like I was able to continue my path and not depend on being in a tech hub like California or New York or something like that, I decided to move back. And I've been here in Mississippi. I worked for a few startups. I worked for a local tech company, and then kind of that was what led me into my consulting career, and then ultimately to where I'm at now.
Yeah, that's great. It's I think we've Kyle and I both have had our times where we've come from Vancouver, or I guess Kyle even originally East Coast, Canada, to Vancouver, spending time in San Francisco. I was Minnesota, and now and then into San Francisco for 6 years. So yeah, totally know that experience. And it's, you've been set up well now with, handling that distributed team, that remote team experience, I guess, coming into 2020.
That's really going to go to play for you now. I mean, I love your story because I came up similarly, grew up in Nova Scotia. WordPress was one, PHBB actually, PHP bulletin boards were what I got into, and I was always trying to modify them, but I came up as a self-learner. Did you take any kind of formal education path with your career, or were you just kind of absorbing and learning and driving through curiosity to get you on that professional track?
Yeah, it was all just self-taught. So it was all things like I was using a lot of the YouTube that was starting to come online. So you started seeing Stanford and Harvard, MIT, and all these places starting to post videos at the time. And I was really interested in those because I would never personally have been able to actually get into those schools, even if I could afford them. So having the opportunity to actually see these same classes that those people were taking just really inspired me actually to kind of think, okay, I'm getting like this similar education that these people are getting. And that was one of the things that really kind of got me going. And then, of course, I was spending a lot of my money on things like at the time, lynda.com.
Yeah.
And then I think Pluralsight, I was spending some money there, buying a lot of books, Udemy, pretty much anything I had extra to spend. I was actually buying courses for like at least a year or two. And I still do that now, but at first it was a lot more because I was so interested in just learning. And yeah, it was all self-taught, and it was all from developers that I guess such as myself now are out creating our own courses and things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And then I guess that's part of what led you to the idea of giving back and the same ability to transfer knowledge. And I know you've written some books and have done a lot of stuff online. I mean, how was that transition from professional to sort of educator or professional author? How did that sort of come about?
Yeah, it was kind of organic. So I would say that I have always really been interested in teaching. And I think that it was mainly because the entirety of my life up until I started getting into coding, I was not really good at anything and I wasn't interested in anything. And I was starting to, get good at coding. And when I was living in California, there was all these meetups and there was a lot of tech events and stuff. So when I moved back to Mississippi, there was literally nothing here. And before I even moved to LA, I was actually wanting to find those sorts of things here in Mississippi, and they just weren't here. So when I came back to Mississippi, I was like, okay, maybe I can start creating some of this stuff here. So I actually started a meetup here, and it was the first, tech meetup for developers in the city and maybe even in the state. I ran actually that meetup and another meetup, and most of it was actually out of my own pocket. The money was out of my own pocket. It was really hard to find sponsors, and I would host one meetup a month at first, and it was really hard to find speakers at first. So I would actually speak at every single one of these events, and that kind of got me comfortable with teaching and speaking. And then over time, we started growing that. We had college students and other people like interested in tech, very non-traditional type of people seem to show up because there just isn't a tech industry here. And then through that experience, I wanted to have a coding school. So I actually opened a coding school here a couple of years after moving back from California called Code South Labs.
Mm-hmm.
And we ran that for about 2.5 years, made nothing, in fact, lost thousands and thousands of dollars because most of the classes that we were putting on were free. And anytime we charged any money, it was like here and there, and we'd have like maybe a half dozen or so people show up. And most of that money I was paying to other instructors. But I would say about 80 or 90% of our classes were just free. So we would just do something like a half day or a full day, course on JavaScript. At the time, React was getting popular, and we did some React, we did Angular. And so I got more and more comfortable teaching, and I really enjoyed it because it was like the only thing, again, that had ever like really worked for me. So I was always, I'm still excited about this career path because I enjoy doing it, and I'm kind of having more success here than anything else. And then I would say, like, as far as like taking that to the next level in corporate training, because with React Native training, I was actually training companies like American Express and Visa and even Microsoft and Amazon. And the experiences I had teaching in Code South Labs and speaking at the meetups really helped me there. And like the way I was able to actually get those types of those contracts as an independent person or an independent company ultimately was mainly because of my activity in the React Native community. So React Native got released in 2015, and I was working at a startup in Mississippi called School Status with the CEO Russ Davis and my manager Lee Johnson. And they were really kind of on the forefront of new tech, especially for Mississippi. So they were already kind of using React and stuff. And they were already using, at the time, it was kind of, fairly new, Angular, I guess you could call it new, for here it was at least. So we picked up React Native a few months after it was released, and we decided to build an app with it. So I was able to kind of be on that team, and we released the React Native app maybe 6 months or so after the framework was released. So we were like
Early.
really early adopters. Yeah. And so learning React Native was really fun for me because I really enjoyed mobile development. And that was actually one of the things I always wanted to do when I started coding, was like build an app. And I focused on jQuery mobile and Cordova and Ionic and things early on.
Cool.
But React Native made me feel like an actual native developer because I was like, having more of a native app versus just a web view. So I would go on StackOverflow and just hang out there and answer questions all day. And I ended up becoming like the top contributor for React Native on StackOverflow. And I haven't answered anything in years, and I'm still like by far the number one just because people go back and upvote me. So like when people see that, they like start recruiting you for all types of stuff. So I've had so many job offers come in from that, book offers and consulting opportunities. And ultimately the training started coming in through StackOverflow. So people would find me, and this was before anyone was doing any training for React Native. And like a few people would just come out and reach out to me, like Visa reached out to me and was like, hey, we want a training, how much do you charge? And I was like, well, just
let me start a company.
I don't know, let's like come up with some ridiculous number. And they were like, sure. And I was like, okay, this is like better money than I'd ever made. So I was like, okay, let me put up a website. So I put up this website with HTML and CSS called reactnative.training. It was like written in jQuery and stuff. There's no like fancy stuff there. I was optimizing for SEO. And man, I just started having like hundreds of people reach out to me for training. And what I basically did was contracted out Reuven Lerner, who is someone that has like a lot of training experience with Python, and he's a podcast host as well, I believe, on a couple of podcasts. And he has a training like Facebook page. He's just all into training. I think he has a newsletter, and he actually does consulting for other trainers. So I like paid him to basically teach me the training business. So he taught me how to price things. He taught me how to do all kinds of stuff during these training sessions. So I just was like doing that on the side and still working full time at a startup. I would take like a vacation for 2 days and use my vacation time to go train. And then I had a contract that came in that was like over $100,000, which was more money than I was making, at my other job for the whole year. And it was for like maybe a 15-day total commitment. So like at that point, I was like, if I take this contract, then I'm just going to quit my job and go all in on this. So I did that. I took that consulting gig, and that's when I went full-time consulting for about a year and a half. And that got really old quick. It was just travel and a lot of weekends, and it was just a lot of work. I made a lot of money, but it was a lot of work, and I decided to maybe not do it after a while. And then this opportunity to work at AWS came at the perfect time. So I quit that, and I just left all of that money on the table and pretty much just walked away from it.
Well, it's I can see how the progression of your passion is evolving, right? Like one of the things that's really cool to me is you mentioned Cordova. My good friends Dave and Andre were behind PhoneGap, which was a big, hugely involved in Cordova. And then you can see how React Native came out, and I can even draw the parallels into what you're doing with Amplify. All of these things I think have made the workflow around mobile development so much more accessible for so many more people. I'd love to hear from you sort of just how you think about that evolution and, maybe what was working back in the day for you around React Native, and where do you see it now as you move towards these AWS Amplify approaches. It'd be cool to just hear about the history of the workflow around mobile development from your perspective.
I think the thing that's always attracted me has been really good abstractions that make me more powerful without having to spend a lot of time learning something. And therefore, I'm able to kind of leverage my existing skill set to do something that other people may have been also doing, but they've had to spend maybe 10 times as much time and effort and to learn and do what they're doing. But I'm able to do that same thing because I've leveraged some smart abstraction in some way. And I think like I've focused on those types of things throughout my career. So when React Native come out, I kind of, you can look at that, or you could even look at the React ecosystem at that point as a very efficient thing to learn. Because if you learn React, you can now build native apps and web apps and all this other stuff. And I think that focusing on that was really a smart thing at the time, and other people did the same as well. And now we have Next.js and Gatsby. You can do all this stuff if you know React. And I think that with cloud computing, one of the things I always was missing as part of my skill set was how to build a scalable backend. I was a really great front-end developer, but I knew nothing about actually building something at scale and being like a back-end developer. I could build a database, I could build an app, but like if something happened and I had like 1 million users, I knew nothing about being able to kind of replicate my database and have a scalable backend that would be able to handle that load. So I'm very attracted to the serverless paradigm and what it offers and what it promises to offer in the future. So for me, that's the ultimate abstraction over cloud computing, or within cloud computing and within the whole backend space. Because if you buy into what serverless, the paradigm of serverless promises, it abstracts a lot of things away for you, so you can focus on a less work and get a lot more value out of the amount of time that you've kind of invested. So to me, that's like another abstraction that's really, really interesting to me. So with Amplify and the team that I'm working on now, we're really trying to lower the barrier to entry to serverless. And we're lowering the barrier to entry to cloud computing by building another abstraction over what kind of is serverless, trying to improve the developer experience. So I think that what I am really interested in is, again, being able to use my existing skill set as a JavaScript developer and being able to kind of build the next Instagram, and just the idea that someone like me could do that with a small amount of people, or even a single developer could build something that would scale to that extent. Maybe not, to what Instagram is now, but you could definitely build something that would scale to 10 or hundreds of millions of users if you're, a small team or a single developer, and you leverage a lot of these serverless technologies and JavaScript because of the way that these services are built. So I'm really, really interested in that because of the idea that it is one of those extremely powerful abstractions.
Yeah, it's super high leverage. I mean, I have plenty of quotes that I use, analogies I've used. 10x engineering is 5 people making 2 times more productive. One I heard recently on Twitter that I thought was great, which really resembles what you're saying, is good engineers figure out how to solve really complex problems. Great engineers figure out how to leverage something so they don't have to. And that's very much what I hear you talking about. And one of our hypotheses is, as this idea permeates across more technology and the workflow becomes more of this term that drives at that construct, we'll see that kind of leverage in a broader set of tooling. And what I think is unique about Amplify, which I'd love to zoom in a little bit on for the audience, especially people who are less experienced with it, is obviously React Native had a broad area. You can do websites, you can do mobile apps, but Amplify takes that even beyond that paradigm. And as I understand, you can manage databases, you can manage authentication. So maybe we could zoom in a little bit on Amplify and just talk about how the workflow you guys have built with Amplify is drilling into these other areas and creating that leverage. So now you can run a bigger, more broad set of things with that leverage, which, like you said, lets you build an entire application.
Yeah, exactly. So what Amplify kind of is it's a suite of different tools and services that do that. They enable you to build out these scalable full stack applications. So we have on our team a lot of front-end developers, actually, and on AWS that's very rare, because maybe in Amazon there's a lot of front-end developers that are building out all these clients, these client front ends. But at AWS, most of the engineers are kind of like back-end developers and infrastructure engineers and solutions architects building out these back-end services. So on our team, though, because we're building out a lot of these client SDKs, we have a web team, we have a React and Vue and Angular and Flutter team. We have like all these separate teams, and they're all building out these client SDKs. And the reason that we kind of have that is because we are building full stack tooling. So what Amplify is, it's a CLI for provisioning infrastructure. And all of the infrastructure that we support at the moment is all quote unquote serverless. So if you think about how big AWS is, there's like over 200 services. We support a very small subset of those services with escape hatches. So for instance, you want to build, X type of app. We pretty much provide all of the tools necessary to build most types of applications. Maybe not everything, but for if you think of something like Facebook or a blog or Instagram or Twitter, and you think about all the things, the components that would be necessary to build that, you can build that. And we do that by kind of having all the things that are necessary to kind of get to that point. So you have to have a way to actually build that infrastructure. So we have a command line tool that will allow you to spin up different services and manage and create those and destroy them using friendly names that we're kind of used to. So as a front-end developer, I know what authentication is, I know what an API is, and things like that. So if you're working with AWS in the past, you had to understand things like the service names, and you also had to understand how those services worked. And one individual service might be a specialty for someone. So out of the 200, you might have someone that specializes in EC2, and you might have someone that specializes in Lambda. And this person might spend years being up to par and being a specialist in that one thing. So imagine having to understand how to work with like 20 or 30 or 50 of these, because they all need to work together to actually build a cloud backend. So what we've done is we've abstracted away a lot of the AWS and cloud terminology into more of like a configuration tool in a CLI. So the CLI will do things like, okay, I want to add authentication. I can say amplify add auth, and then we'll just ask you a bunch of questions that will let you kind of create this infrastructure as code, as opposed to having to open up a few thousand line CloudFormation template and understand all of these different service names and then kind of glue everything together. I think one of the things that's really confusing with AWS sometimes for new people is this idea of identity and access management, IAM, and how that works. So we manage all that for you. So if you want to create an app, you might first add authentication, okay, amplify add auth, and then you might want to add an API, so amplify add API. And the hard part might have come if you were creating your own infrastructure as code, creating the association between the API and the authentication service to kind of make those work together. Well, we actually do that for you. So the CLI will automatically know that those two services need to work together. So once the API is added, you can then enable the authentication service that you've created to be the identity provider. So therefore, you have now a managed authentication service, something like Auth0 or Okta. If you've ever used that, we have our version of that called Cognito. And then you can use Cognito to then access all these other services as well. So you might then create a serverless function, a REST API. Your authentication mechanism will work with that. You might then create a database, and you might want that database to talk to your Lambda function. We'll enable that. And when you do all of that via the CLI, so like once you've created all of your backend stuff, you basically have done that via the CLI within your client application. So you have your React app, or your Next app, or your React Native app. You then use the Amplify CLI to add this stuff. So the next step is, I have all this backend infrastructure. How do I actually connect it to my app? And this is the other thing that we work hard on, and that's why we have all these client teams there. We're also creating the client SDKs to interact with those backend services. In the past, the main SDKs that people worked with were the AWS SDK, which was not really built for client-side operations.
Pretty
it was
low
more
level.
built for working on EC2 or in a server or in a Lambda function, which you can still do that. But for working on a client, you have things like session storage and local storage, and uploading images and making HTTP requests, providing the proper headers, and all that stuff was actually also extremely hard to understand. So what we've done, we've tried to abstract that away as best as possible, while still providing an escape hatch if you need to do something else, but kind of making all of these decisions for you. So if you call an API, we automatically get the ID token, and we pass everything in the header. And when the API gets the request, we then verify the identity of the caller. And if it's authorized, we allow it to happen. If it doesn't, we send back a network error. So we do all that stuff for you. And therefore, you're able to kind of just say, okay, API.get, and then that's all you have to do. And then everything else is kind of handled for you.
Yeah, it's great. Is it safe to assume that most people are using this or sort of following that sort of server-side rendered paradigm around sort of Next and Gatsby and React, like you said, or are there still people who are sort of single page application backend? Is there sort of a paradigm where people are converging around how they're building that client application? or is it pretty like, I guess I could ask what kind of SDKs you're supporting and get a pretty good sense of that, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say Next.js is getting more and more popular because of all of the things that you get out of the box. You get client rendering, but you also get server-side rendering and static page generation. But I would say right now, for sure, our number one for the web at least is React. We have the most React developers, and for the most part, they're just using it for a single page application for building out these single page applications. And Vue and Angular are also up there. I definitely see Next is growing, and that's one of the things that we're going out of our way to support. So we just had a major release a few days ago where we enabled SSR support, where we allow you to kind of pass the session seamlessly between the client and the server without you having to do anything. So that way you can make authenticated requests from the server. And we also kind of did away with some errors that you might have gotten if you were working with a Gatsby build and using the Amplify client. Because again, we originally created to be a client library, but we also want to support it now in these SSR environments. So therefore, we're shipping the same client library with a few updates now that allow you to use it on the server as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. If somebody wanted to get started with Amplify, where would you say is the path of least resistance for them to go and start getting traction with using the tools?
I think I would try the docs, and we have two main areas that are kind of really nice to get started with. We have like a getting started guide. Yeah, that's exactly where I would go, docs.amplify.com. And if you click on get started, you'll have the option to go to a few different areas. So like if you're a Next developer or React or an Android or iOS. So all those will be a getting started guide, and that's definitely the best place to go. And then after you've done the getting started guide, we actually have a guides link at the top. And those guides are also just a bunch of different guides that kind of walk you through how to do different things. So, I would start there. The guides are a good place to go after you've done the getting started guide.
Cool. And is there sort of a community?
And then I have a YouTube channel.
Channel? Okay, cool. We'll drop that link in there. What about like Slack community, or maybe you guys are on IRC. I don't know. Where's the community hangout?
Yeah, we have an Amplify Discord. So let's see here if I can find the link to that.
Should be on the website, I would think, right?
Yeah, it's on the website.
Cool.
Yeah, so you can actually just go to the Amplify docs, and there's a link to it at the bottom left corner.
Cool. Question: Why Discord?
Why Discord is probably the best place. Yeah.
Why Discord?
That was a decision by someone on our team that has managed a lot of communities, and he did a lot of research around everything, and Discord seemed to be the best way for us to do not only community stuff, but like events in the future, and have a lot of ways to do cool stuff. So it's worked out so far. I mean, I've used Slack and Discord, and I don't really have a preference. I like both for different things, but Discord does seem to be really good for this sort of thing.
Yeah, I use it a lot for gaming in the gaming community. I've been more actively gaming since we've been in quarantine, but I've heard a lot more about Discord being used for developer communities. For the longest time it was IRC. Then we got sort of into this middle ground of like Gitter, and then Slack was really kind of popular for a while, and now I'm hearing Discord. So I'm always curious to hear kind of maybe why some of those things are beneficial and why that tool is helping you, drive cohesive community and that sort of feedback loop with the people who are interested in the open source projects that you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, with Discord, we can do stuff like we also have a program called the Community Builders Program. It's kind of like if you've ever heard of the AWS Heroes program, you could compare AWS Heroes to something like the Azure or GCP programs of similar types. The Community Builders Program is like a step up to that. So if you want to become an AWS Hero, the AWS Heroes get all types of really awesome stuff, and they get flown out to all these events, and they get a lot of perks. And then I would say the baby brother of that is a Community Builders Program. You get a lot of money for development. You get a lot of opportunities and access and stuff like that. If you're a community builder, you get like a special annotation on Discord,
Roles.
And a lot of people get consulting contracts and stuff out of that just by having that. So it's kind of like a cool thing that Discord allows us to do.
Cool. Yeah. Discord has, I know, the concept of roles because a lot of the gaming communities leverage that. And, a lot of the games that you play, for example, you might get perks in the game if you're a certain, type of member within the community. So that makes sense. That's part of what's driving the cohesive community program for you.
Yeah, it's worked out pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're constantly thinking about that, where is this impact point for, communication and collaboration, especially in this distributed, digital by default world that we're in now, and how does that look? And so it's interesting to always hear that debate, because I think there's a lot going on right now with that kind of Discord, Slack, even with Adam, who was on the author of Event Modeling, who was on the last show, talking about all the different open source options.
Rocket Chat, I think, is what they're hosting
Yeah.
themselves. Yeah.
So take us a little bit. We haven't talked, as specifically about the book. Tell us a little bit about your recent book, Full Stack Serverless, and walk us through kind of what that is talking about in modern development.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a lot of ideas around, what the future looks like for a lot of different things, and it's really interesting to me to kind of to talk about this stuff. And a lot of times, and I do a lot of writing, so a lot of times, when I want to convey something, I write a blog post or something like that. But I feel like with a lot of the stuff that we're seeing today, and it also kind of goes back to React Native. There was a talk that I saw by James Ide. It was called Team X Technology, and it was about React Native. I think it was like 2016 or 2017, and it was like one of the most inspiring talks to me that spoke to me. It may not have been probably like something that a lot of other people may have gotten the same feel from, but I was really like inspired by his idea and his very future forward looking of idea of what the future of engineering teams kind of looked like. So like that talk really inspired me to get into React Native even more and more. And based on that talk and a lot of the stuff that I'm kind of seeing in the cloud computing space and modern web and things like that, I kind of also have a vision for the future around what I think a large number of developers will be looking like in maybe 5 or so years, but also an opportunity if you are just an average developer or someone that wants to maybe be into high value consulting or be a highly valued person in the future, kind of like as far as the job market is concerned. I have this like vision of someone that is kind of this full stack cloud developer or full stack serverless developer. So kind of taking that idea, I wrote this book around that, and I leveraged Amplify in the book. But in reality, I think in the future, you're not going to have just Amplify or just Firebase. I think those kind of fall into similar categories.
Serverless.
Even though I work at AWS, but I really feel like AWS a little bit stands out when it comes to this idea of full stack cloud, because I think infrastructure as code plays a very large part in this, and you can't really do everything yet with GCP with infrastructure as code. Now, I'm sure they're working on that, and I think so. So what I'm basically trying to say is I'm not trying to push Amplify right now in this discussion, but I think tools like Amplify are going to be like the future that fit in a large part of this. So let's say you might be maybe Netlify and Vercel and those sorts of things add a lot of features in the future. Those might be in this category. Firebase, once they do more stuff with their infrastructure as code, maybe Azure is going to be coming out with something. So I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more things like this. But essentially, you're going to have, in my opinion, this idea of a restructuring of engineering teams in the way that James Ide was talking about in that team for on the client. You may have had in the past a web team, an iOS team, and an Android team, and you would have a new feature and you would say, okay, this person here, he's going to work on this thing in the web department. Then I have this girl over here that's an iOS developer and she's going to do this thing. And then we have this third developer that's an Android developer. So we're going to like have all these people and they're all doing their own things, and we're going to be shipping at different times, and there's not going to be a cohesive person working on that same feature. With React Native, the idea is, okay, I have this new feature, so I'm going to give it to this one engineer, and she's going to implement it on iOS, Android, and web. And therefore, she understands the API across all these platforms. She owns all 3 platforms, and it's faster because she understands, how everything works across all these platforms. And if something needs updated, it's kind of like a very more efficient way of doing things. And I think the same idea is going to happen across full stack development. So in the past, we had a very disjointed thing that would happen for teams where you have a web developer, you have an iOS developer, an Android developer, then you have also your backend API engineer, and you might even have someone else that works along that backend developer that does other stuff. So you might need like talk to 5 or 6 different people to get one feature implemented. Whereas with full stack cloud, with these better abstractions, not only on the front end but on the back end, you might just have a single developer that is a cross-client developer that does all of these things on the client, but also on the back end. So they own this feature from beginning to end. And the efficiency and the developer velocity that you get out of something like that, if executed properly, will set you apart, from everyone else. And when you're thinking of like a competing or a situation where you have opportunity costs and people are trying to kind of beat you to some idea or building something that you're kind of like competing with someone. But really in the market in general, having high developer velocity is something that can get you a lot of benefits that are intangible. Really, kind of, you can't really say, oh, this is the reason that this company was successful. But when you start digging deep into that, sometimes you find that they were able to experiment a lot more than another team. So having this developer velocity, I think, is going to be very powerful in the future. And people that kind of understand this and take advantage of it are going to be very extraordinary. And I think we're seeing this happen now, where you can learn something like JavaScript and you can build these full stack cloud apps with Amplify or these other tools as well. And that's kind of the idea behind the book. And I think that it was kind of my first stab at kind of conveying that and showing actually how it's done in the real world. And I think in the future, it's going to get better and better.
I'm buying the book right now. Like, I'm literally buying it right now. I couldn't agree with you more. And like, we think about this so much. The reason we started this business is we kind of had this realization that developer productivity is the new cloud. And, the strike coefficient in 2017, so there's 300 billion loss in developer productivity every year. And it's how we're leveraging, right? Yeah. And I mean, that was a stat when I saw that as an entrepreneur. I was like, wow, I need to get behind this. And how do we get behind this? Well, we started thinking about what is Amplify? What are these other tools? Well, they're a way to augment the workflow. And that's where we focused on how to bring the workflow in a place where developers can build it, but it's also accessible to the rest of the company through Slack. And that's sort of the premise behind our business and why we run this show. So you got me jazzed up. One of the questions I'd love to just ask you is, what do you think this world, which we both agree is happening, 5 years, 10 years, it's happening. What do you think that does to the term DevOps? Because I really subscribe to AWS's definition of DevOps, ideology, best practice, embodied in tooling. But I think a large part of the market is moving from sysadmin to their interpretation of dev, which is dev and ops, rather than an ops practice that enables devs to do dev. Where do you think this goes? Is this just a term that makes no sense anymore now that the developers can do all of this? Are we living in the future, in the past, even saying that is what I'd love to get your perspective on.
I mean, I don't really know, like in the long-term future, but in the near-term future, it's still going to be there. It's just going to, I feel like the people are going to be, even though like we're specializing more and more, when we're doing more and more, when we're able to do more and more, we're also taking on more responsibility. So I feel like DevOps is going to be still there, but other people will be kind of being able to take some of that and deal with it themselves. So when you think of like this type of tooling, it just kind of takes on a different form, in my opinion. So DevOps traditionally, is something now different than it was maybe 5 years ago, like you mentioned. And I think in 5 more years, it's going to be even different, but it's hard to say exactly what that is. But I also feel like tech is continuing to grow, and every company is a tech company, right? And it's going to not go away anytime soon. In fact, it's going to get more and more. So I think like when a company scales, you're still going to need like DevOps people. I think the smaller startups getting started will have less of a need for those people. So if I'm a YC company and I have $10 million, or maybe even $1 million, what can I do with $1 million? You can't really do a lot with $1 million these days, right? If you have an iOS engineer and an Android engineer and a backend engineer, and you're in Silicon Valley, that might be your whole $1 million that would be gone in 1 year. But if you have one full stack cloud developer that is across platform on the front end and also a cloud engineer on the back end, you might be able to pay them like $300,000 or $400,000 a year. That person's living really good, but you're also having 2 or 3 times as much runway. So I think early on, you don't really need those DevOps people. As you scale, you're still going to need those DevOps people because you're going to be doing a lot more. And then the same goes with backend engineers. When people hear me talk, they sometimes get scared if they're a backend engineer, or they not get scared, but they're like, just think it's not right because like, what are the backend people going to do? I think backend people are going to be even more in demand in the future. It's just going to be different. Like I think when you have a smaller startup, and as you're scaling up, you're not going to need as many dedicated backend or dedicated DevOps people. But yeah, as you scale, these people are going to, of course, still need to be there. They're just going to be a little more specialized, and I think they're going to be taking on harder tasks than just creating a CRUD API. Yeah. So they're going to be having more important work to do than creating these stupid things that are just repetitive tasks, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like where I see things.
Yeah, I think that's a good read on it. It's a spectrum, of course, and I think over time we're trying to create higher leverage for the top of the funnel because there's such a demand for talent, and so many things have already been solved. We don't need to solve them again. I think it's an interesting question to check in on, though, because I think over the macro environment, Moore's law inevitably is always true, and this is really what we're talking about when we're creating these abstractions and leverage for teams. One of the things that we're really excited about what you're doing, obviously, is that early stage piece, and I think I've talked a lot in talks in different DevOps circles about this idea of lean DevOps and trying to stay lean and maintain the dichotomy, or maintain a balance of the dichotomy between how your team's growing and the inefficiency you introduce over time through new processes and tools. And what I love about what you do with Amplify is it sets an accessible foundation early that gives you higher leverage longer. And when you sustain that leverage longer, you ultimately end up with less inefficiency in the long term. And as your company grows, to your point, you're introducing these new things, these new processes. So the more people can leverage these tools early, I think the better it just sets us all up, especially the developers, for getting to this place of leaner operations in the long run. We try to visualize this a bit and just like, what's the minimal amount of things you need in the beginning, and preach this idea of just adopt things over time as you need them. And I think that's one of the cool things about Amplify as well, is you can kind of plug in that next component and that next component, so you don't have to tackle every single tool out there in the market, which I think often happens in some of these circles because people sort of look at DevOps as a silver bullet,
Yeah.
Well, so as we're kind of coming up for the last 10 minutes, you've talked a lot about React and AWS, and give us a little bit of a view of your stack, some of your favorite dev tools, and other ways that you automate and optimize.
So, because I work at AWS, I spend most of my time building with AWS on the back end. So on the back end, let me talk about like some of the stuff I'm really interested in. And one of them is the thing that I also, work on every day. It's AppSync. But I'm really excited about AppSync because all it really is kind of an API gateway into all of the AWS services. So it's just a single entry point that you can set up and then just have this GraphQL API. And then you can talk to literally every backend service. It does not matter what it is. You can talk to, machine learning. You can talk to you can talk to like DynamoDB, SQL, Postgres, whatever. And I think that in the past, what we've done is we've built this really amazing service, but to actually talk to these services, you have a GraphQL resolver piece. And that piece at the moment, just like if you've used Amazon API Gateway, is written in a templating language called VTL, Velocity Templating Language. Now, this is a really archaic kind of language that no one really understands, and it's really hard to debug, and it's hard to write if you're not familiar with it. So like one of the biggest pain points for me is using VTL. So it's never really been like my favorite thing to do is when I go and have to write this logic, it's really hard. So we're actually working on a VTL replacement. And I think once that happens and you're able to just write JavaScript in those resolvers, then it's going to kind of really, really open up everything. And we released actually already a few weeks ago direct Lambda support. So you can actually map any GraphQL operation into a Lambda function, which is essentially, the same thing as mapping directly into the data source. You just have now to deal with Lambda, which, the thing that you have to do now with Lambda, of course, is you're going to have stuff like these cold start times, which really, you can kind of get, you can kind of like have fixes for those, right? There's ways to get around that, but there's still a small additional latency that you're going to deal with, even if it's in the double-digit milliseconds, like 10, 20, 30 milliseconds. Once we have that VTL replacement, that will go away as well. So you're able to kind of map API requests directly into databases. So I think once that is, we've improved that, that's going to be, there's really no other API layer I'm ever going to use at that point other than that. So I'm really excited about that. So for all my APIs, I'm working with AppSync, and there are other options out there though. So if you're not using AWS, you can use stuff like 8base, Hasura, and I think even Fauna might have like a GraphQL client or something like that. But essentially, yeah, like with AppSync, I mean, I like using, and then my database that I really like using is DynamoDB, and DynamoDB is the same database that Amazon uses and that Nike and you know, all these big companies like Netflix use, and it's infinitely scalable. So I'm the type of person that, like, I want to find something really good and I want to just focus on that and become really good at it, because as long as I have this one thing that works for most things or almost everything, and I become really good at it, I can pretty much do anything. So that, like, that, those are my things I'm focusing on. DynamoDB because it's really, really, really fast, infinitely scalable, and then AppSync is my API to talk to DynamoDB. And then for anything that NoSQL can't do, I'll send it to like Postgres or something like that. And on the front end, I mean, I'm a big React person, but I'm really, really starting to do a lot more with Next.js. So I'm really, you know, playing around with that. So my stack right now would be, you know, Next.js on the front end. My API layer would be a GraphQL API with AppSync, and then my database would be DynamoDB. Those are my main pieces. And then from there, everything else is kind of, you know, depends on the app. But those core pieces can go into every app that I built. So
Swiss Army knife.
as long as it's a web app.
Yeah, cool.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing all that. You know, as we start to wrap up, I mean, you know, it's been great to hear your philosophy. I think we share a lot of similarities when it comes to thinking about the future of DevOps and this kind of velocity of developers and how to empower developers to do more with less and provide that kind of like, you know, spread of microservices and the ability to move across with all these different tools that, you know, have exponentially grown over the years. So really great conversation. You know, any last thoughts from, you know, either Nader or Kyle, like as you're thinking about, you know, anything else you want to share with the audience, and then where can we find you online?
No, I mean, I feel like I've talked so much. I hope I haven't talked everyone's ear off. I would say follow me on Twitter at Dabit3, and that's where I talk about, sometimes talk about tech, sometimes talk about memes and whatever, joke around. But you'll see about 25% tech there.
Tell us about the 3. You know, why 3?
Oh, well, it was my first. I think I had gotten Dabit3 on one account, like Gmail or something, and now I'm just Dabit3 anywhere. So you can pretty much just go to any social media and look for Dabit3, and if I'm on there, that will be probably where I'm at. So I just kept it consistent.
Consistency, love it, love it. Cool.
Yeah, I think Kyle has a similar story with slot.
Oh, really?
You can't even say it. No, it wasn't taken. So I just, yeah, it's not even a real word. Cool. Well, hey, this has been great.
Right.
Thank you so much. We really enjoyed it.
It was really awesome being here. A pleasure being here. Thank you for having me, and enjoyed the conversation for sure.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have for today. Remember to click subscribe to Never Waste a Weekly Show, and we'll be back next week with more opportunities. Take us out, Kyle.
Opportunities.